Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Rana Maqbool with you at PTP World with Farrukh, Pitafi and Raja Faisal with me in the studios. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at what has happened in India with regards to the G20 summit. And this is, of course, something which is being celebrated in India and is a cause of a lot of triumph that is going on. But what is more important also is, of course, that this is happening despite the kind of human rights violations that we keep on talking about within India, that, of course, in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Something that the US President Joe Biden also claims to have raised in his bilateral meeting with his Indian counterpart, and also regarding the issue of freedom of press. This was also something that was questioned in a rare press conference to the Prime Minister Narendra Modi when his visit to the US was happening. And this is something that, of course, is a lot of concern for countries like Pakistan and many around the world who have a lot of concern about the kind of human rights violations that are going on within India. But at the same time, we also know that despite the kind of statements that perhaps may be coming in from whatever was being discussed in the bilateral meeting, there hasn't been much more that is being done in terms of the relationship that seemed in fact is moving closer. Whether or not they're actual allies and can actually support each other in the way that both of them might be expecting is, of course, a question mark that still remains. But at this time, we're going to try and explore what is going on, whether or not the G20 has been a success, what sort of human rights violations were ignored when this entire summit was conducted, and whether or not the absence of important leaders from Russia and China was also something that significantly marked the summit, and then what to do about the kind of human rights violations that we've been seeing and which unfortunately are expected to increase till the upcoming elections in India as well. At the end of our show, we're also going to be talking about something that has deeply saddened the hearts of all of us sitting here in the studios. We have, of course, learned about the passing away of somebody who was a regular guest at our show. Senator Rana Maqbool Ahmad passed away after a long illness, and this is something that we have seen, unfortunately, coming through right before our eyes, and would much rather have him present in our show. But unfortunately, we will be giving a tribute to his life and his services today, and our heart also goes out to the bereaved family, and we hope that they find the courage to bear this loss, and that Mr. Rana's soul rests in peace. And we'll talk more about him at the end of the show today. Of course, with me for the discussion, we have in the studio Farrukh and Faisal. And for our first segment regarding what has been going on within India, we have been joined online by former Ambassador Mr. G.R. Baluch and Indian human rights activist Dr. John Dayal. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being a part of the show. And let me start with you, Dr. John. The situation, of course, with reference to what is going on in India is no news to Pakistan in terms of the kind of violations that exist, and of course to sane minds like yourself. But in terms of what is being talked about, especially through Indian media, there is a lot of pomp and show regarding the success of the G20 summit, despite the fact that we saw the absence of two important leaders, and the fact that the situation in India is nowhere near improving. How do you look at what has been recently conducted by the G20 summit, and whether or not you would call it a success?
Dr. John?
Yes, Dr. John, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. My question is with reference to what is going on within India, and the fact that a lot of media from India is talking about the success of the G20 summit. Would you agree with that? Do you think that despite the kind of news that we keep on hearing about what is going on within India with reference to the human rights violations, what's happening in Manipur, for example, or the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, do you think that the G20 summit was in fact a success?
I would say that the fact that the US President, which is Joe Biden, had to go to Vietnam to be able to tell the world about what he should have spoken in Delhi is itself a matter of great shame for India, to the extent that the rebuke on India's human rights, the civil society, and the lack of freedom of its press has to be spoken by the US President in a third country. What does it serve? For weeks before G20, all of us in civil society, we organized 3 separate people's meetings where we discussed all the issues that the third world faces vis-a-vis rich countries. And we consistently asked that people be put at the center of whatever governments of these 20 countries want to do. And we discover that this is just a matter of business and nothing that really touches people. Human rights are discussed in passing. In passing. From my point of view, as an Indian, I would say there's a lot of money, 4,000 crores gone waste.
Right. Baluch Saab, the situation, given, of course, the scenario and what the US President Joe Biden has also remarked, do you think that it amounts to much when he says that he raised this issue? He talked about human rights violations. He talked about the issue of freedom of press. These are, of course, important aspects to be discussed. But do you really think that this was something that was stressed upon and is a matter of concern or priority for the US, and that such statements coming in after the G20 summit or the bilateral meeting really have substantial value in terms of what we can draw from it?
Sana, thank you for having me here. Actually, if we look at the human rights violation record of India, at least in the past about a decade, we would see that it is something which has been recorded by Amnesty International, recorded by human rights groups within India and outside. And we must not forget that the US State Department issued a statement where concern was expressed. Whether Biden was not brave enough to express it while being on the Indian soil is a matter which can be debated and left to the historian to judge him later. But the fact that it does not hide the gross violations which are recorded, if you look at the Amnesty International report on India for 2022, on each and every criteria, India is one of the worst countries. In fact, to the shame of the international community which bothers for the human rights violations, India, so-called champion of democracy, champion of human rights, has slided down 10 positions from 140 to 150. And we see all manifestations of human rights violation, which includes systemic and even procedural. I mean, imagine, I was like shocked to see that they came up with a legislation that they could not use certain words, so that the sitting ministers and sitting members cannot be hold to account for the brutality that they were doing or the corruption they were doing. In fact, Kashmir, the Indian occupied Kashmir, illegally occupied Kashmir, in fact, is a glaring example in the present history of the world, where you find rape as a tool of war and separation. You see disappearances. You see children being taken away from their parents. Then you come down to the mainland, even in your within the vicinity of Delhi. In fact, I would say that was a violation of the. If I was an Indian, I would protest there when the poor communities were made to. They were removed by force. We saw it in live. Some of the brave channels showed it, just because they didn't want to show the ugly face of India. That is not democracy. That is not how democracy works. So I think the international community and those who matter and they champion the protection of the human rights have to stand up to this BJP-led, RSS-led, a so-called facade of democratic dispensation, where there is a kind of authoritarianism, there is a kind of criminalization of the politics, and most of all, hatred as a policy, discrimination as a policy, state policy. How can you do that? Look at their legislation they did for the registration of the citizens. They discriminated against one religion, banning the marriages, calling them jihad marriage. So people are not really, not allowed to even love each other. My God, what else do you want in this 21st century to say that India has cease to exist are to be governed with the norms of the 21st century. Yes, there's a lot of halabolo, there's a lot of media campaign to project Mr. Modi as the champion of modern India and India shining. But does a country shine with these violations? I say no at all, not at all. Any person, any institution which has a slight respect for the human rights cannot condone all those violations that we witness, violation against people and violations against women, violation even of the democratic norms in the parliament. Yes, please.
I understand where you're coming from. At the same time, I want to know that despite whatever you're saying, it seems that this still becomes an issue that is at the back burner for most of the countries when they're dealing with India, also including the US.
No, if I may say.
Yes, Dr. John.
This is in fact the hypocrisy of the entire G20. For purposes of security or their defense needs, for purposes of their commerce and their trade, the focus is no longer the human being in any of these 20 countries. The focus is in who's going to sell arms to who, who's going to make a roadway, who's going to trade or not trade with who. And somewhere in between, apart from lip service to climate change, there is very little that concerns the people of the region. You've included Africa. Latin America is to be the next president. What is there in these decisions here which will impact on any one of them? And the fact that the parlays were sterile, they didn't have the warmth that was required. And I think I would, like most Indians, be very much disappointed considering the labor, the cost, and the hype that had gone into it.
Right. Farrukh, I understand that there was a lot of discussion with reference to the leaders of China and Russia skipping G20. Yeah. But at the same time, there were many others, of course, including the US president, that did in fact attend the G20, despite whatever they had to say afterwards. But I want to know then that in terms of what is being talked about how everybody sort of condemns human rights violations or comes forward and at least pays lip service to this, there is still this symbolic and quite evident support in terms of countries actually coming and attending a summit like G20.
Right, Sana, because earlier you were talking about whether a G20 was a success or not. I wanted to begin my intervention by quoting scriptures. Mark 8:36, right? What profits a man if he gains the entire world but loses his soul? So India, as a nation, has been gaining influence over the past 20 years. There's no doubt about it, right? It is a very influential country. But first time in its history have we seen a government that uses that external clout for its internal politics. And what we are seeing right now, it seemed that G20 summit itself was part of a Elect Modi campaign. All leaders from all over the world, especially the powerful quote-unquote democracies, because they want to believe themselves democracies, came and vetted him, actually kissed the ring on his finger. And we have been seeing that this is how things have been moving forward, right? Regarding whether it was success or not, we'll have to wait and see how, durable those commitments are, because whenever there is money that is pledged, we have personal knowledge that that money takes some time to actually trickle through. And then we don't know whether after the elections that are going to take place in America, whether Narendra Modi is going to, in India, whether Narendra Modi is going to be the Indian Prime Minister. There's likelihood that he might win again, but you never know. But it also exposes something very interesting, the relativity of word democracy and the relativity of the word human rights. We have been seeing that all these Western powers keep on criticizing China for Uyghurs and how they are treated or allegedly treated. We haven't seen a video, we haven't seen a picture coming from those parts. But if from Kashmir, We have seen kids being blinded. We have seen a child who's sitting atop the dead body of his grandfather, and we have seen horrendous tortures that are taking place. But of course, like Harry Potter's come and go room, human right concept is come and go, because when it comes to your own interest, you can actually overlook all of that, and you can get away with get on with the program. Now, the biggest concern that I have right now is that India again has humongous clout, especially its diaspora is very influential and very strong all over the world. So I think that while we are judging the Western leaders, we have to realize that their elections are sort of also dependent on this diaspora, and that's why they keep on placating India. In the meanwhile, what is happening? India seems to be losing its democratic character and its soul, because if there's a ruler who can just, in order to beat the opposition, which called itself India, can rename the country as Bharat, then anything can happen.
Right, I understand what you're saying about losing democratic character, Farrukh, but I also want to understand whether that's something that is also going to influence India's relations with other countries, because, or is it eventually going to, you're saying, self-destruct and cause a lot of trouble for India itself, and then of course its relations with other countries?
Yeah, I'm because I consider myself a well-wisher of India. I never think, and I never actually hope that India is going to fall apart. But the humble summation is that there are direct historical parallels. When the West actually, in order to contain the dead Soviet Union, kept on propping up Germany, especially the Nazis. And in the end, Nazis went out of hand, and they actually ended up murdering millions of people, right? So biggest problem right now is that the people who are ruling India right now, they don't have compassion for their own fellow citizens, Muslims, Christians, Dalits, people of lower caste. Then do you think that they are going to be more compassionate in coming days? There is a possibility that this monster will go out of hand, and when it goes out of control, then perhaps it will be too late, because now, unlike 1945, we are living in a nuclear and spatio-temporal world.
All right. Faisal, when we take a look at the scenario, of course, we understand how we dissect and see what's going on within India. And of course, a lot of other bodies around the world are also speaking up, such as Amnesty International, of course. But at the same time, I want to know what sort of trickle effect there exists in terms of the impact of summits such as the G20, given the fact, of course, that if India refuses to believe that these are the problems, or these are the kind of actions that is taking within India that are not democratic or illegal, then I want to know whether still, despite all of that, the conduct of such summits on such an international scale will eventually build up that whole cycle of countries actually responding and things continuing, and the rest just happening in the background.
Asana, this is highly unfortunate that, of course, the statement was given, as Dr. John earlier mentioned, that it was given in a third country and not in India itself. To me, I think there are certain reasons for that. We know that when obviously Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, when he defended the rights of the people, obviously regarding Khalistan movement, Khalistan referendum, he simply said that people have freedom of speech, and that is what they were doing, because he could sense that the Indian media out there was outbursting everything on him, and was actually maligning him, that you are giving a chance anti-India voices to persist in your country. It means that you are behind them, and you do not want India to obviously progress. Here if we try to understand the framework which is being run by in today's India, of course, BJP's framework, it is evident to the whole world that they are anti-minorities. Not only anti-minorities, but they are racist as well, because Dalits, who are considered as Indian, when they take their Aadhaar card or whatever, it is written Hindu over their Aadhaar card, not as a minority, but they are classed as Hindu, but of course lower class Hindus, and
technically they are majority.
Yeah, they are the way they are being treated in today's India. So it is racism, it is anti-minority. Today's India is anti-minority. Of course, Christians, whatever happened to them in Manipur very recently, and it was shown to the whole world, and no one mentioned a single word about Manipur. And while obviously I was going through the whole event itself, it was very sad not finding anybody talking about whatever took place in Manipur, and it's a carnage going out there. And to be honest, I mean, the way Kuki tribe was treated out there, it was like somebody just was pursuing with a genocide of the Kuki tribe, and nobody talked about a single word about it.
Yeah.
But I think countries like US, countries like the Western countries, of course they have a lot to do with India in coming future related to their ambitions against China. And in South China Sea, of course, they see India as a power and they want to stand with India. They have simply ignored all of the human rights, and they know that two of the major countries, of course, Russia and China, their participation was merely a names participation, and it was not something of tangible. That is why they knew that the credit to this G20 being held in India, it has already been snatched, and it is merely few of the leaders getting together, and it's not a real kind of G20.
Yeah.
They already knew that. So eventually they came up with this waiver that they won't be talking about all of these things, so that India at least gets a bit of credit out of it, because all of these meetings are being held in India just because of one reason, and that is that of course Modi, he wants to win next year's election. One very important thing, Sana, and it's just the two-liners, it's about one of the union ministers of India, former chief of the army staff, General V.K. Singh. He issued another statement, and he said that we are going to take over Azad Jammu and Kashmir very soon. I mean, I don't know what kind of world they're living in. They very well know that when they came towards Pakistan back in 2019, they had a reply from Pakistan, and this would be, of course, a reply whenever they try to come once again. And to me, I think all of these statements coming from India, obviously from the ministers and from Modi himself and Indian media, merely they're just trying to justify that next year's elections, of course, they belong to Modi and BJP.
Right.
Yeah, and I certainly want to smoke whatever journal is smoking at this.
Yeah.
Dr. John, the situation, especially in terms of what you were earlier talking about, the hypocrisy of countries around the world, I want to know then whether or not the people within India also feel and see the hypocrisy of BJP or the Indian leadership as well, given the fact that so much celebration is happening around the G20 summit despite the human rights violations. I want to know whether people also seem to be falling within this trap, this illusion that things are fine and well when they're not.
I live in India. All of you do not. Certainly, we are the most worried. No doubt, Mr. Modi has a majority in Parliament, but that does not necessarily mean that every Hindu supports him. The Congress is largely Hindu. The Congress opposes it. 20 other political parties oppose the BJP. His vote share was never more than 30%. So it is not a representative of the community. That is for sure. And I think the coming elections, I hope, will prove it in the ballot box. Having said that, let me also say something more. It is not that just this G20 has failed. Indonesia, G20, nothing came out of it. And I'm afraid, looking back another year, nothing is going to come back from Latin America. G20 is not designed to assist the poor. But whatever has happened in India will happen bilateral things, out of which something will come. There's a bilateral deal with Saudi Arabia, which is also multi-billion. Something may come out of there, and so on and so forth. As far as peace in place, I'm a pacifist. I would not want any tension between India, Pakistan, India, China, India, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka. I live here. I want India to be a peaceful country. I want to work for peace between countries, this region, track 2, track 3, and all of that. So, to me, I want to support anything. That's why I'm opposed to war. US war. It is not conducive to peace in this country, to peace in the Indian, peace even in the Chinese Sea. And we must look at these things from how they impact South Asian subcontinent, and not for the heightening of political tensions. It only prosper.
I'll come back to you. We're experiencing some difficulty in trying comprehending what you're saying because of, I think, some technical issue. But let's go to Baluch Saab as well. With reference to what is happening, Ambassador Saab, the way that Pakistan has always, of course, seen the situation is that we've tried to highlight this issue at every platform and every chance we've gotten. And increasingly, there have been certain support around the world, such as, of course, Amnesty International, as you were saying, or other platforms in terms of the UK Parliament or other areas where this discussion is taking a serious note. But I want to know then, how is it that people around the world, including the people of the US, can actually pressurize or mobilize their governments and decision makers to actually do something more than just give lip service, and what contribution can Pakistan give towards this as well, since of course we've been highlighting a lot of issues for many decades even now. Is there a change in strategy that perhaps is warranted?
Yeah, I think this is a challenge. Is a challenge for the world, is a challenge for the conscience of the people all over the world who think about the human beings, and they put human beings and citizens at the center of their thinking and planning. But unfortunately, we are in an era where the geo-economic and geo-strategic interest of the countries, they supersede the subtle human values. That's a problem. So that puts a very, I think, crucial responsibility on people like Dr. John and ordinary people like us all over the world to really chip in the gap that is created by the vested interests, which are represented by some states, and within states, some forces. Look at the silence of the Indian media. Look at the silence of some other media in other parts of the world, like Palestine, for example, or something like about Kashmir. So I think the citizenry has to come, the civil society has to come and coordinate. Of course, now the social platforms are an important, I think, tool, but unfortunately, rather than those social media being used to protect the human rights, in some cases they're being manipulated to project certain personalities, even to project certain ideologies. That includes the ideology of hate of RSS and BJP. That is a worse, or even Israel, for example, against the Palestinians, or against the suppressive regime of India in Kashmir. So I think we all citizens of the world have to come together through the civil society, the intelligentsia, the academicians, the media persons, and of course, we got to also support those already existing structures like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and many other organizations which already exist. So I think we need to really develop, I think with a little sort of, sorry to say, but I think in case of what we call the global south, while it is already not very well in the industry and economy, but also in terms of projecting and promoting the human rights, their organizational structures are either non-existent, or whatever they are not potent enough, they're not effective enough. So I think the people of the South also have to come up and coordinate with the North, with the more developed world, and try to do it. And of course, Pakistan has been playing our missions abroad, our communities abroad, and also our organizations which try to promote and project the human rights violations all over the world. And I think ultimately, I would say the bottom line is the citizens of the world are the ultimate guardians of the human rights of all citizens of this global village. Nobody else will take responsibility unless we citizens take the responsibility. Yes, please.
Very rightly put. I would go towards obviously Dr. John. Dr. John, if we look at today's India, of course, it is India where we see that, of course, politics of oppression is at full swing, and since the BJP has took, the premier office, of course, I'm talking about Narendra Modi. Narendra Modi, as a prime minister, of course, he has, give an image of politics of oppression prevailed in India. What is the time frame? When would it end in India? And do you see it ending very soon somewhere, or you predict that it might continue in the coming years, and of course this oppression would lead to a disaster?
Neither India nor Pakistan or any other country of the world can afford to keep on suppressing people, particularly religious and ethnic minorities. That is now not how the world in this century works. So obviously at some stage or the other, internally or through external pressure, things would have to normalize all over. Having said that, the fact is that elections are due certainly by April next year, possibly by December this year. Election time, unfortunately, brings out the worst in the BJP and Mr. Modi, because what is his main say before the voter? We know the economic issues, we know the economic crisis, jobs have not improved, and that is the main thing for a vast number of young Indians. So obviously, the next thing is to try to polarize them, trying to weaponize hate, as we say. Islamophobia is one, anger against Christians, rousing that is another. Dalits is a perfected issue in India. So whether it is 14 or 19 or 23, unfortunately, communalism and the communal rhetoric will continue to play a pretty important role and occupy quite a large space in the election rhetoric. But for the other side, India, the group of political forces and the people form India, for us, polarization is counterproductive. We have to quench this fire. We have to present an alternate of peace. And we would like to hope that the voter understands this and votes accordingly. I don't think a sane voter now would like a perpetuation of the situation.
Dr. John Dayal for joining us, and thank you, Mr. G.R. Baluch, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. We're now also going to be taking a look at what is going on, especially in terms of course, the very unfortunate incidents within India itself also, and then of course what is going on in Manipur, and then of course the kind of scenario that we have seen moving forward as well. Farrukh, a lot of the times that this has happened is that unfortunately we are perhaps talking about the same things again and again, and it seems very cyclical that we keep on talking about the kind of propaganda that exists, the kind of hypocrisy that exists, and the way that geoeconomic and geopolitical concerns that different countries share. What then is to move forward, considering so much time has already passed by and perhaps it seems more will pass on? Is there a way to support the people who are suffering at this moment?
Right, Sana, I think that, Gandhiji actually used to recite Shelley's poem called Mask of Anarchy, right? I think that is the most relevant thing here. I don't think there's a way ahead. The only thing is endurance. And I think that while we keep on criticizing Narendra Modi and his party, he is many things, but he is not a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Whatever they have been saying, they have been doing exactly that. Unlike the other political parties like Congress, which have been actually championing publicly, verbally, the cause of secularism, but in the end, they have actually, they are responsible for the kind of rentier and exploitative state that exists in India. So I don't think that in short term there is a reset button, there is any kind of correction. I think that this whole thing will play out the way it is supposed to. But for countries like Pakistan, the most important thing is to protect themselves. Whatever happens in India, I have no favorites. I think that there's going to be further consolidation of power, further centralization of power, and India is going to become a Hindu Raj. But having said that, regardless of that, what we can do as Pakistanis is we can, I'm not that much bothered about India's own internal matters. What I'm concerned about is Kashmiris, because Kashmiris repeatedly remind me that they are the unfinished agenda of 1947. They are Pakistanis at heart and they should come here. But having said that, right now all I am concerned about is protecting my own country. And I think that other countries, especially Western democracies, are gradually being broken down because they are tolerating such kind of hypocrisy.
Right, absolutely, and this is hopefully something that they will consider in terms of their future interactions, and we hope that whatever change is going to happen comes sooner rather than later, and of course Pakistan will keep on playing its part. Now we're going to be talking about what I earlier also mentioned at the start of the show, the unfortunate passing away of a regular guest on the debate and PTV World as well. Senator Rana Maqbool Ahmad passed away earlier today, and this is something that we're all very sad to hear about, and we'd like to remember him today and pay tribute to his services and his work. And of course we very fondly remember his presence in our shows. He was always very kind, and he would always come in the show with a smile and bring a lot of joy and a lot of insight into whatever that we discuss. So he is truly missed, of course, and it's very unfortunate that we have lost him today, and we're talking about his demise and not having him at the show. Our heart goes out to, of course, his family and all his loved ones who are suffering from his absence and his loss. And we hope that they find the courage, and we hope that Rana Sahib rests in peace. And I request both Farrukh and Faisal to say a few words about him as well. Faisal, why don't you begin?
Yeah, Sana, highly unfortunate that we lost him. I mean, only yesterday, me and obviously the producer, we were talking about that we should have, in yesterday's show, of course, it was related to the elections, and we were discussing that we should invite Rana Sahib, but of course
we invited him actually.
Yeah, we did, but
he was in hospital.
He was in the hospital, and today it was the highly unfortunate news that we heard that he is no more with us. He was very regular with our program, and one of the voices, I mean, I even put on my Twitter that he was a voice of the Democrats, voice of democracy. He represented in the Senate obviously PMLN, but if we talk about his services, of course in reality he stood for rule of law, he stood for the Constitution. In our show, whenever he highlighted democracy, he highlighted the rule of law, and we should not be forgetting his background was of police. During his police service, of course, he got retired as an IG from Sindh province, and of course he served Pakistan at his best, and right after that, of course, he came into politics, and in politics, of course, while in the police he safeguarded the people of Pakistan. When he came to politics, he safeguarded the Constitution of Pakistan, he stood for Constitution of Pakistan, and he was obviously advocate of the politics, the political fabric of Pakistan. He was not someone who would go beyond the limits while criticizing his political foes. He always tried to sit on the table and talk with them in accordance with the Constitution. I think he was a marvelous personality, and of course he will be missed in our show and overall in all of the shows of Pakistan's media, because he was an excellent voice, and of course we are very sad losing him.
Absolutely. Farrukh?
Right. Sana, speaking of him actually reminded me of, a novel that was written by Orson Scott Card that is called Speaker of the Dead. The person who actually has the unfortunate task of eulogizing whosoever has passed. I hate this role of mine that I have to actually pay tribute to friends who have died. But what do? Life is like that. You are born, you die. Everyone has to die one day. And the bit in between is called life, right? And this is what matters the most. What do you make of it? So Rana Saab is someone who actually restored to a great degree my faith in both bureaucracy and also politics. He kept on appearing in this program, and one amazing thing about him is that whenever he thought that his own party was wrong, he would actually say it as it was, without actually, mincing words. So I think that kind of objectivity and that kind of honesty is something that is going to be missed on television and in our show as well. And if you remember, Sana, last time he was in this studio, he actually told both of us, you and I, because in those days Faisal was, on a sabbatical. At that time, Rana Saab said that you guys have become part of my family.
Yeah,
And everybody recognizes
You're
your
right.
program and keeps on watching in the family. So I think that it is very painful to say goodbye to somebody whom you actually look up to, and whose smile was infectious, whose optimism about life, whose principles was so fetching that even today, while talking about him, I don't feel that I have any regret in saying anything of this sort, because he was a great, true champion. He was a very conscientious man, and he will be missed.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Sana, I just wanted
Yes.
to add one more thing. Obviously, when I came back, you remember when he came to our show and he saw me sitting as well. So he obviously highlighted you and then Farrukh, and then he did say at that time that he's very happy that I've actually returned to my seat. But I remember when I was obviously off air, he did contact me, and there was something which I still remember. He talked with me and he asked me, of course, that Rana and Raja factor, of course, it's something that Rajputs, they always ask each other, and he asked me which side of Pakistan I belong to, and I did tell him that I belong to near Bimba. So he then asked me about what caste, what subcaste is there. So he had that interest as well, asking people about the area they hail from and all. And then of course we kept on, we were in touch. Sometimes he would share Dawn stories. He was avid reader. Of course, he went through news every day, so he was well aware of each and everything, what was going on media, and that kind of person, of course,
he brought a lot of insight,
he's
didn't
larger
he?
than life.
He was very
Yeah.
well read also.
Yeah.
Do we have a couple of minutes
Yes.
Yeah.
further? I mean, when it comes to friendship, Sana, I mean, in this studio, we had these two chairs. When Faisal was not here, one is a bit taller, the other one is a bit lower. So both of us have this bulk of weight. So whosoever would actually, reach the studio first would get the lower seat, so that it doesn't show on the screen.
Yeah.
So every time when he reached before me, he would look at me and smile that I have made it.
He won.
Right? Yeah, he won.
Yeah.
So these are the things that
Absolutely.
you remember. But he was very kind man and
Yeah.
very supportive.
Absolutely. We're glad to have known him, and we're so happy that he was part of our shows and part of our lives for as much time that he was. And we all remember him very fondly. And it's now the memories that we all have. Of course, his absence will be felt for always, and of course, his loved ones and his family and friends are going to bear the most of the loss. And we really hope that they pass through this time with courage and with peace and love, and that they can think about all the good memories and good times that I'm sure he also brought to all of them. That's all that we have now from the debate. We're all prayers for Rana Saab. And it's goodbye from Farrukh, Faisal and my side.